The sharp jolt of impact threw me against the control panel, flashing alarms and blinking lights filling my field of vision. My ship had held out against a lot, but apparently, bravado and luck were finally on their last legs. Gravity started pulling me down hard, and I caught a glimpse of thick, lush jungle out the front view screen before the whole ship pitched sideways into the trees. A few bruises later, I climbed out, adjusting to my new, unplanned surroundings, a planet that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Massive green canopies stretched out as far as I could see, sunlight filtering down in beams that made the air shimmer. I couldn't help but grin. It wasn't the worst place to be stranded, at least not yet. But before I could even find my bearings, I heard footsteps. Lots of them. I turned, finding myself face to face with what had to be a dozen tall, toned women with wide, curious eyes and outfits that consisted of, well, almost nothing. They were studying me like I was some strange artifact that had just dropped from the sky. I lifted my hands slowly, trying to show I meant no harm, but one of the women cocked her head, watching me with an amused smirk. Then they started to laugh, a soft, lilting sound that echoed through the jungle. They exchanged words in a language I couldn't understand, though it was clear I was the main topic. Before I knew it, they'd surrounded me, motioning and pointing, as though they were sizing me up. Hi there, I said, hoping they'd somehow understand. Just passing through. I had a little crash, you see. One of them took a step forward, eyes bright and wide as she leaned in. I could tell she was the leader, or at least the one with the most authority. She motioned to me, then to the others, then back to me with a serious expression. She said something in their language, a string of syllables that sounded oddly ceremonial. And that's when it hit me, they weren't just looking at me. They were looking up to me. A few of them dropped to one knee, heads bowed. I was officially in over my head. Wait, hold on. You don't actually think I'm... But it was too late. The leader gestured for me to follow her. They parted, making a path as though I were royalty. I looked around, trying to figure out what in the galaxy they thought I was, but their eager, almost reverent expressions told me I had no choice but to play along. After a short walk, we arrived at a clearing, where more of them waited. I stood there, helpless as they chanted something rhythmic, something that resonated through the ground beneath me. I glanced around, wondering if I'd accidentally walked into an ancient initiation ceremony. Before I knew it, the leader turned, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said something solemnly that was probably meant to sound reassuring. I'm really just here because my ship crashed, I said, pointing back the way we came. It was all, unplanned. She only smiled at that, nodding with what I could only describe as smug certainty. She lifted her hand, and the rest of the women cheered, a sound that was part celebration, part something else. The next thing I knew, one of them placed a wreath of glowing blue flowers around my neck, giving me a sly smile. And then, finally, someone spoke in broken galactic standard, enough to make my situation crystal clear. Chosen mate is here! I blinked, mouth open. Wait, mate? Chosen? No, you've got it all wrong. I'm just a traveler, a visitor, an accidental tourist. But she just giggled, tilting her head at me, seemingly unfazed by my panicked protests. The women exchanged knowing smiles, some whispering, others giving me a look that was definitely more than curious. They were taking my arrival as some kind of sign, something they'd apparently been waiting for. I raised a hand to try explaining again, but they were already 2 steps ahead of me. One of the younger women stepped forward with a small box, opening it to reveal a glittering stone attached to a thin cord. She motioned for me to bend down, her eyes earnest as she held it out. I did as she indicated, and she draped it around my neck, her fingers brushing my skin just long enough to make me gulp. What is this? Some sort of leadership badge? I stammered, pulling at the necklace that seemed to fit a little too snugly. Chosen father, one of them said in halting galactic, giving me a look that was both respectful and suggestive. I swallowed hard, realizing that they didn't just think I was here to lead. No, they thought I was here for something much more intimate. I forced a smile. Okay, honored to be chosen and all that. But there seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding. The leader gave me a pointed look, her lips curving into a knowing smile as she placed a hand on my shoulder. Her expression was clear: chosen status wasn't optional. It was a role, one I was apparently expected to fulfill. Over the next few weeks, I quickly learned that my new title as the chosen father came with a level of responsibility, and frankly, attention, that I wasn't prepared for. The tribe treated me like a mix between a king and a walking curiosity, constantly pulling me into situations where they wanted to understand human customs. Of course, every conversation seemed to spiral into confusion, particularly when they tried to interpret Earth idioms. One day, a group of the younger women gathered around as I was showing them how to build a simple shelter. "This," I said, holding up a stick, "is just like a support beam. It keeps things standing, just like—" One of them leaned in, eyes bright. "Like what, father?" She had this tone that made everything sound like she was in on a joke I wasn't quite getting. Like a backbone, I guess," I replied, only half sure of how to explain. "Backbone. You know, what keeps you strong." She nodded slowly, absorbing my words as though I'd imparted the wisdom of the cosmos. "You are our backbone, then," she said, her voice reverent. "Our strong, sturdy foundation." I coughed, trying to keep my composure. "Yeah, well, let's stick to building, huh?" But my innocent attempts to share Earth knowledge always seemed to turn into something completely unexpected. I showed them how to start a fire one evening, explaining that it was an essential survival skill. Somehow, that became a nightly ritual, with the women gathering around the flames, leaning in far too close as if I'd invented fire itself. They kept calling it the spark of life. And pretty soon, they were all asking if I could share my spark with them. I'd explain, repeatedly, that it was just a metaphor, but they'd exchange knowing glances that suggested they didn't believe a word of it. And then there were the Earth phrases that they took to heart. After the third or fourth time I said, "You can't judge a book by its cover," they started wearing elaborate coverings and tunics, apparently convinced this would protect their inner selves from being judged. I tried to explain that it wasn't literal, but every attempt just seemed to confirm their suspicions that humans were hiding deeper mysteries. It got to the point where some of them started approaching me with hopeful expressions, asking if I could reveal hidden meanings to them. Of course, privacy was a foreign concept to this tribe. I couldn't go 2 minutes without someone popping in, asking for fatherly wisdom or some kind of guidance. One morning, I tried meditating just to clear my head, but within seconds, I had a small audience. They watched me with intense fascination, nodding as though I were performing an ancient rite. One of them asked if I was summoning my inner spirit, and I gave a weak nod, too tired to explain. Meditation sessions quickly became mandatory, and every morning, I'd sit cross-legged in silence, while they observed, convinced I was communing with higher forces. They'd sit in silence too, occasionally sneaking glances to see if I'd show any signs of enlightenment. Eventually, they even brought in offerings, like strange fruits or carved trinkets, thinking it might help me connect better. On another day, one of the elder women approached me with a bowl of some kind of alien tea. She offered it with a solemn look, explaining that this would open my senses and make me more receptive to the wisdom they sought. I took a tentative sip, only to realize it was the bitterest thing I'd ever tasted. She nodded approvingly, interpreting my grimace as a sign that it was working. I forced a smile, feeling like I was in some kind of cosmic prank. Whenever I tried to address the tribe, I'd catch snippets of their discussions about me, the chosen father, who was full of hidden power. Apparently, my every gesture, every turn of phrase, was a clue to my secrets. If I scratched my head, they'd whisper that it was a sign of thoughtful reflection. If I yawned, they'd murmur about earth fatigue, and insist on bringing me strange cushions and blankets. One night, I simply sneezed, and that somehow became a signal for change is coming. Then came the question of earth bonding. One of them asked me if, As the chosen father, I had a special ritual to connect with others. She was close enough that I felt a little trapped, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. I tried to explain that on Earth, people connect in different ways, mostly trying to downplay it. But she took that to mean I was withholding some profound, mystical ritual, and the next thing I knew, every single one of them was asking me to share the bonding rite. I was just one guy, marooned and outnumbered, dodging question after question with whatever explanation I could cobble together on the spot. It didn't help that every time I tried to set a boundary, it only added to the mystery. I once told them I needed personal space to recharge. Well, that sparked another theory that recharging was an Earth ritual they needed to observe and, naturally, try to replicate. By the end of the month, they'd even started keeping their own personal spaces, arranging them with little stones or sticks, claiming they needed to be ready if I needed to recharge with them. I gave up trying to clarify and let them carry on, realizing that sometimes, the more I explained, the less sense I made. Of course, the night watches became their favorite. Every evening, they'd insist on taking shifts to guard me, setting up a rotation where they could, as they put it, learn from the chosen father. Each of them would sit close, leaning in, whispering questions about earthly wisdom, and hoping to catch some grand revelation. I tried teaching them simple things, like counting or basic words, but that just led to a whole new level of fascination. One night, one of them asked about Earth's seasons, and I told them about winter, snow, cold, the works. They huddled closer, entranced, one of them shivering as if the thought alone brought a chill. After that, they all wanted to know about Earth's trials, the way humans conquered the elements. And naturally, they decided I was some kind of weather sorcerer, bringing warmth to this chilly world just by being there. By the end of my third month, they'd managed to adopt half a dozen human expressions that they didn't quite understand, using them in hilariously wrong ways. One day, I overheard two of them arguing about a small trinket, and one of them shouted, "Don't rock the boat!" in a serious tone, despite there not being a boat within light years. I couldn't help but laugh, which only made them more determined to use human expressions whenever they could. If anything, I realized they were just as fascinated by me as I was baffled by them. And in some strange way, that mutual confusion seemed to bring us closer. They wanted to learn, to understand everything about Father and the strange planet he came from. And whether I wanted it or not, I was now their teacher, their guide to earthly mysteries. And all I could do was try my best to keep up with their endless curiosity, hoping that, someday, I might figure out the role they'd cast me in. As the years rolled on, I found myself slipping into the role of a reluctant teacher and guide for this tribe of wild alien women. They were enthusiastic, eager to learn, and completely incapable of understanding my attempts to set boundaries. It was like living in a reality where every earthly expression or gesture I made could be turned into a cosmic lesson. If I scratched my chin thoughtfully, they'd say it was a mark of wisdom. If I yawned after a long day, they'd ask if I'd spent all my energy creating worlds. I started teaching them more about Earth's culture, though with mixed results. The first time I tried to explain the concept of a prank, I thought I was just sharing a harmless Earth tradition. The women listened with rapt attention, and I described how people on my home planet would play pranks on each other to lighten the mood. They were fascinated, absorbing every word like it was the secret to unlocking the universe's mysteries. But of course, they had their own unique take on things. A week later, I was walking through the village when a bucket of some glowing, viscous liquid was poured over my head. Apparently, they thought I'd been pranked because I hadn't been laughing enough. The women stood around me, beaming, as if they had just discovered the meaning of life itself. "What is this?" I asked, wiping the liquid from my face, trying not to completely lose my cool. One of them, her eyes gleaming with pride, said, "Father, we have pranked you! You must laugh now." I stared at them, blinking in confusion. "You poured glowing goo on my head to make me laugh?" They nodded earnestly, clearly pleased with their work. I tried to explain that pranks usually involved an element of surprise, not so much an inevitable outcome, but they were too wrapped up in the idea that this was now the epitome of human humor. I gave up. Instead, I wiped my face and muttered something about sweating bullets, which, naturally, they took to mean that I had somehow absorbed the essence of metal and now had some kind of advanced ability. 4 days after that, they asked me if I could sweat more metal to help them with their weapons. I just told them I'd need a day to recharge. Another time, I tried to teach them about the concept of dating, which on Earth was a little less romantic than it sounded, but that didn't stop the tribe from taking the idea and running with it. I explained how two people might get together and have a meal, share stories, and maybe enjoy each other's company before deciding if they were compatible. To me, it was just an everyday concept, but to the tribe, it became the holy grail of interactions. A few days later, I walked into the village to find several of the women lined up, all wearing what I could only describe as date attire, tight wraps, sparkling beads, and expressions that ranged from eager to borderline desperate. "Father," one of them said, her voice soft but commanding, "we wish to go on a date with you." I opened my mouth to explain the concept of dating, but before I could get a word out, they were already planning elaborate meals, trying to teach me how to date them properly. I never expected to spend my nights trying to figure out if I had inadvertently become the tribe's personal bachelor. Each time I told them it wasn't a competition, they nodded seriously and asked for a list of my preferences. I wasn't sure if I was being serenaded or trapped into some kind of weird beauty pageant. As the months turned into years, I started to notice a shift in how the tribe saw me. I wasn't just their father anymore. I was becoming something of a legend. Some of the women began speaking to me in awe, asking questions about Earth's grand philosophers or great sages, even though I was no expert on either. They would listen, hanging on every word, treating each little tidbit of Earth knowledge I offered like it was the key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe. One evening, as I sat by the fire, one of the elders approached me with a serious look on her face. She had been the tribe's unofficial spiritual leader before I arrived, and now she stood before me as if I were the one who held the answers to everything. "Father," she began, "we seek your wisdom. What does it mean to be fulfilled?" I blinked, a little caught off guard by the sudden seriousness. To be fulfilled?" I repeated, stalling for time. I had no idea how to answer that question in a way that wouldn't leave them more confused. "Do you feel fulfilled?" she pressed, her eyes burning with intensity. I scratched my head, unsure of how to respond. "Well, I guess being fulfilled means doing something you're proud of. Like a big task, or something that makes you feel like you've accomplished something important." The elder's face lit up with understanding. She leaned in, eyes wide. "Yes. Like when you bring the fire. You've brought the fire to us, Father." I nodded, a little relieved. At least I wasn't totally messing this up. "Exactly. You can feel fulfilled when you do something that really matters to you." She stood up, proud of my answer, and immediately began passing the word to the others. "The Father has spoken," she declared. "Fulfillment is like the fire. We must do things that matter." The next day, every single one of the women seemed to have adopted this new idea of fulfillment. Some of them started building grander shelters, others went out on hunts, and a few decided to start learning more of the human expressions I'd taught them. But the most bizarre part of it all was that they began to refer to their own daily tasks as fulfilling, in an almost spiritual sense. I began to realize that my wisdom was spreading like wildfire through the tribe, and they were interpreting everything I said as some kind of deep, metaphysical truth. I had gone from being an accident of fate to the centerpiece of an entire culture. The women didn't just want to learn about Earth anymore, they wanted to learn about me, their father, as if I were the key to their entire understanding of the universe. The strange thing was, I kind of started enjoying it. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a sage. But somehow, I'd become the most important man in the tribe. And in the process, I was beginning to feel a bit fulfilled myself, though I wasn't sure how to explain that to them without getting another round of questions. But at least now, when I sat by the fire, they didn't just expect me to be some kind of wise elder. They also expected me to entertain them, to make them laugh, and to be the one who kept the tribe in good spirits. And honestly, that was a role I could live with. The years continued to pass, and as much as I tried to escape the chaos of being the father, I found myself getting deeper into the thick of things. At first, I was a reluctant leader, someone just trying to survive in a world where every moment seemed to explode into some sort of awkward miscommunication or hilariously inappropriate scenario. But as time wore on, I became something else. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, in a bizarre, unpredictable, and somewhat terrifying way. One day, as I was attempting to take a break and enjoy some peace by the river, a small group of the tribe's women approached me. They were the youngest and, I'd say, the most curious of the bunch. They had developed an insatiable interest in the earth customs I'd shared with them over the years, though their interpretations were usually somewhat off the mark. They sat down beside me, eyes wide and expectant, ready for another lesson. "Father," one of them asked, her voice innocent but filled with a certain mischievous undertone, "what does it mean to get a taste of your own medicine?" I nearly choked on the water I had been drinking. I knew immediately that I had inadvertently unleashed a whole new world of confusion. Well, it's a saying," I began, stalling for time. "It means that sometimes you have to experience something that you've done to someone else to understand how it feels." They nodded, clearly processing the concept. But I could already see the wheels turning in their heads, likely preparing to interpret the phrase in ways I'd never intended. Sure enough, it wasn't long before I found out just how far their imagination would stretch. The next day, they brought me some sort of herbal concoction in a cup. They were beaming, eagerly watching me with eyes full of expectation. "Father," one of them said, "we have made this drink for you. It is your own medicine." Before I could stop myself, I took a sip. The taste hit me like a punch in the gut, bitter, foul, and somehow earthy in the most unpleasant way. I gagged and spluttered, desperately trying to keep my composure. "What is this?" I gasped, trying not to offend them but struggling to suppress the urge to spit it out. One of them smiled proudly, a little too smug for comfort. "It's your own medicine, Father," she repeated. "We wanted you to feel what we feel when you drink the things you give us." I realized, with a sinking feeling, that my teachings had taken a turn for the absurd. I had introduced them to earth sayings, and now they were interpreting every phrase with an extreme literalism that could only come from people who had no idea what sarcasm was. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "I mean, well, sure," I managed, still trying to hold back my gag reflex. "This is certainly unique." The tribe's women surrounded me, nodding solemnly, clearly pleased with themselves. They thought they had finally cracked the code of human behavior. They had taken a saying and turned it into something tangible. Later that evening, as I recovered from the horrific taste of my own medicine, I found myself in a very peculiar situation. The women were still talking about the phrase, but now they had turned it into a new tradition. Every time I handed them a drink, they'd wait for me to react before proudly declaring, "It's your own medicine, Father." No matter what I served, no matter the flavor, it became a ritual. A bizarre game in which I had no choice but to be the target. The worst part? I couldn't even claim a victory, because it was like living in a never-ending loop where I was both the punchline and the puncher. The tribe had so thoroughly embraced their version of Earth's humor that they started using all kinds of expressions I'd shared with them, each one turned into a bizarre, alien tradition. For instance, putting your foot in your mouth quickly became a ritualistic challenge. The women would try to outdo each other by saying something ridiculously offbeat, and whoever said the most outlandish thing would receive a token of respect. This might have been fine, except that I found myself involved in every ridiculous challenge, whether I wanted to be or not. I'd offer a simple piece of advice, only to be met with a round of applause, or worse, a ceremonial foot kiss, which, while well-meaning, was honestly a little too intimate for my liking. But as ridiculous as the entire situation had become, There was one thing I started to realize: I had truly become part of this tribe. I wasn't just the outsider anymore, the chosen mate, or the father. I was their family, their friend, and in some ways, their teacher. The weird and awkward moments weren't just sources of comedy anymore. They were proof of a bond one never expected to form. One evening, after yet another strange tradition involving the metaphor of keeping your head above water, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. I was no longer the gruff, sarcastic rogue who had crash-landed on this planet a decade ago. I had grown, adapted, and in my own way, contributed to the tribe's growth. They respected me, they listened to me, even if it was for the most bizarre reasons, and they trusted me. And in turn, I began to understand the value of community and connection in ways I never had before. There was a certain joy to this life, bizarre as it was, that I couldn't deny. The tribe had taught me as much about humanity as I had taught them about Earth. As I sat by the fire one night, surrounded by laughter and the absurdity of my own situation, I couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. Despite all the confusion, the misunderstandings, and the literal interpretations of every human saying I had ever known, I had become someone they valued. Not because of my skills or my cunning, but because I had shared a piece of my world with them. And in return, they had given me something I didn't know I needed: a sense of belonging. So I leaned back, allowing myself a rare moment of peace. "Maybe I am the father," I muttered under my breath. And to my surprise, one of the women, who had been listening intently, nodded sagely and replied, "Yes, father. You are the father of all wisdom." I almost choked on my drink. Of course, that time, it was just plain water. But with the tribe, you never really knew if something was just a drink or another lesson in disguise.